Hi everybody, in this video what we're going to do is talk about working with Zbrush, kind of give you a tour of the software before we start getting into any kind of like exercises or projects or anything like that. In the next video we will start exercise 1. The document that goes along with that should be available to you already for you to review, but we'll have a section of the next lecture where we talk a bit more about what we're creating and review the sheet as well. So this video is just about, how do we approach working with Zbrush. The prerequisite course for this was an introduction to 3D modeling, so you should be familiar with modeling in Maya, where the work pipeline takes you from modeling low polys up to high polys, and you basically will use modeling tools like extruding, beveling, bridging, and things like that to be able to generate a mesh. With ZBrush, there is some of that build to it. You are still working from a lower mesh form, but you're doing it in a sculpting manner. So what you'll really be doing is working with digital clay. That's how you should really kind of approach working with some of these meshes. The rules that you have to follow with working with certain 3D objects in Maya and stuff just don't apply to what you work with inside of ZBrush. So I want to make sure everybody who's coming into the course who might have worked with Maya or Blender or some other software for a few years and anticipate there's going to be a translation between what you do. There is, but it's in smaller bits of the work pipeline, not into the basics. So what I have in front of you guys is a small little project I'm working on. I probably put maybe about 16-20 hours into working on this guy right here. And this was modeled created both in Maya and ZBrush. So one of the things we'll talk about throughout the semester is how we start bridging some of those pipelines, so you guys get a better idea of like where you take your sculpts after you finish them in ZBrush. How do you start working with them in other animation software or game software, things like that? How do you push those out? So yeah, let's just get started talking about this UI then. So the scene that I have constructed here with the two birds inside of the convertible is composed of multiple subtools. And what I mean by subtool, if you could reflect this back to what you learned inside of Maya about its outliner, it's kind of that. You break down different meshes between ideas and pull them together into one form. So over here to the far right, we have this tool section right here. And right here we have something called subtool. And then you'll see this little scroll bar here. This builds up everything that's inside the scene. So one of these guys would be like this chair, and this one's the other chair, and the other one is like another portion of the model. So it's important for you to understand that you have to have these ideas separate when you start sculpting, which we'll get more into, but knowing that you kind of break these apart, and you can almost think this kind of like the outliner meets kind of like how Photoshop does theirs system, because you got groups like with folders and stuff like that inside of it. So there's a lot of subtle nuances to building up like a subtool system inside of ZBrush. The other thing we should take a look at is this right here. This window right here kind of describes the most recent activity that I've been working with inside of ZBrush. This can be a little bit tricky to kind of wrap your head around, but it's a sessional based system unless you're saving in projects. So what I mean by that is, if we take a look at all this stuff under subtool right here, this is all one tool. This is one tool, this is one tool, this is one tool. If we are working just on one tool, not a project, but just on a tool, and we start opening up different tools, we'll start seeing them kind of build inside of this. So you'll see where it says something like Cylinder 3D. I could click on Cylinder 3D and it takes me to that tool's history and what I've created with it. And if I wanted to go back to the other ones and stuff, I just have to find the one I had open. It's one of these guys. There we are. So you can see basically it's almost like having multiple documents open in Maya. So you're able to kind of jump back and forth between ideas and then start combining some of these guys into a different structure, because this subtool is everything. These guys are individual ideas. And I'd mentioned that it's sessional. and I mean that by if I'm just working on tool and I close out the software and I open it back up, this stuff will go back to its default. But if we start saving in projects, which we'll cover that as we start working through the first exercise and projects and stuff, you'll be able to retain all that information that's inside here, but your file size gets bigger. So the kind of what you're thinking is like how far along in the pipeline are you until you start needing to save a project instead of just saving out a tool. So I know it's a big idea and you might feel a little lost on what I'm describing here, and that's fine because we're going to be going through that process of making sure that we save items correctly and how we transfer them from how we transfer items from one project to another. So I'm just trying to give you guys kind of a quick outline of what to anticipate between working with this. All right, so the other thing is you probably want to start out with is just being able to navigate inside of our scene. So in the scene, you know, you can see how we rotate and orbit around our model here. I'm doing this just by left-click mouse and dragging in the negative space, you know, all this area that's red. So if I click and drag here, you can see it orbits the mesh. But if I go directly on top of it, I start applying some sort of brush stroke to it. So there's, you know, a way if you want to orbit around this, you're going to want to grab from the negative space, not directly on your mesh, because then you'll start, of course, you know, start defining how your mesh surface changes. So zooming in and out, there is some hotkeys for this. So you can see I could zoom in and zoom out. The hotkey for that is you basically hold on to the Alt key and right mouse button click, and you can go into pan. And if you let go of the Alt mouse or the Alt button and hold on to the right mouse button like you never let go, you can zoom in and out. This will probably take some time to get used to. So as you're starting to practice around this, if you want to start moving around your scene, you could always use these guys right here. You know, these are the how you orbit inside of all of your viewport right here. So, you know, if I take move, I could move it around like I did before. I could zoom in and zoom out and rotate. And these guys work by me clicking and dragging. So you can see my icon right here. I'm left mouse clicking and dragging. And it's going to move it around the scene. It's just that when you get a little bit more comfortable with using hotkeys, it's nicer to kind of go in here and just use, you know, the hotkeys to move that around rather than hopping over here. So we will, of course, cover that as well. You know, all the different hotkeys you guys could be using. You know, things like, you know, one of my favorite ones is always going to be the F key that focuses in on your object. So if I move it off scene right here and I can't find it, if I just tap the F key, it'll pop into that scene and I can kind of reorbit and change the perspective of all these guys again. Let's talk about how we navigate through projects real quick. So you guys, of course, won't have this, and you'll probably want to work with a mesh to kind of play around with. This is what I suggest doing, is opening up your lightbox area. So if you open up ZBrush and you see this right here already open, you can open and close by clicking on lightbox. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the project guy right here. If I click on project, this should bring up all the prefabricated example files for you to play around with in ZBrush. So that way, you know, you could kind of like, you know, practice around painting, get used to some of the pipeline to it. I definitely suggest exploring these guys because there's lots of interesting things inside of this. And we'll just open up the demo head female real quick just so you can see how this guy opens up. This is asking me if I want to save it. I'm just going to say no because I already have it saved somewhere else. And you'll see that everything's been reset inside of my scene, and all of this information has changed also. As I mentioned, it's sessional based off of projects and sessional based off of tools. So you'll see this change a lot. But inside of here now, you can see we've opened up a new project and we can start applying deformation on this. If I start dragging across the surface of the face here, you can see we're deforming it. And the reason it's doing it is because it's based off of the standard brush right here. This is one of many brushes that's made available for you in ZBrush. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this again to kind of get rid of that window. You'll also notice up here in this top left-hand corner, this is a newer feature. I think this came out in 2019. And it's just this little silhouette mode, so it's really nice to be able to see your work in silhouette mode. And we also have this guy right here. This is a new kind of orbiting gizmo that help you snap. So if you're looking for to snap this guy right into front, you can do that. So let's go back and talk about this brush setting, because everything we're going to be doing inside of ZBrush will require us to work with some sort of brush. So let's get used to just kind of working with brush basics here, like the things we're going to look for. I suggest us starting off with the standard brush today. We'll go into the other ones like flatten, inflate, Damien standard, all the brushes that are located in here. We'll probably cover, I'd probably say throughout the entire of the course, maybe around 30 at most. There is some of these brushes, there'll be stuff you just never need to use for, because we got IMM brushes like for clothing, curves, and things like that. And those are prefabricated models, and we want to use our own. But with the standard brushes, again, this is what I'd start off with today. You'll notice that it's pulling away from the mesh when I drag across it, and it's also doing it on each side. So you see these two little dots right here. That's because this is in symmetry mode. So to turn off and on symmetry mode, you could hit the X key. When I hit the X key, you'll see the other dot disappears, and we draw on one side. So if we want to invert what we're doing, see how we're going towards the camera when we do this, when we draw across this, it's pulling away. If I go up here where it says add, I could change it to subtract, and now we're pushing into the mesh to move it around. And we could also increase and decrease the intensity of that. So if I increase the intensity of the subtraction, it's going to push in a lot harder. So as you're pulling across a surface of an object, you want to make sure that you're not going to destroy your mesh by going too heavy or not give it enough impact to be able to really make a difference. If you're going down to like 1 on add, you're probably not going to notice anything for a long time, because it's going to take 100 strokes to equal out 100% on that. So it's going to take forever. So you'll need to play around with that quite a bit. There is a draw size over here, which will increase and decrease the size of your brush. So now I can get in here and draw a little bit larger. And then there's also one above it called focal shift. Now focal shift works with that ring that's on the inside of the two circles. So it's the thinner red ring. If I start pulling this back and forth, you'll start seeing that, if we take the focal shift and bring it off, now we're got a really sharp point at the end of this. And if we take it all the way down to, down here, we have a very broad point. So you can see it starts making these big impacted areas, which would be very useful. So that's how you can kind of navigate the add subtract area. There's also an area for color application, but we're not going to talk about that today because we have a lot of kind of base information that we need to kind of build from that. So we'll return to this on the next lecture, but feel free to kind of play around with it, see what you can figure out with it if you'd like, but the next lecture will cover this in depth. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is subdividing. So if we take a look at this face, it's a really well sculpted out to the sense it's got a good base form to it, and you could probably build off of it, but it's not really smooth. You can see a lot of faceted edges to it. So when you're sculpting, you try finding the lowest form, and maybe they have in this, to where you retain that information, and if you hit the Control D key, it subdivides it. It increases its active points. Go ahead and Control Z real quick. Let's take a look right here where my mouse is jumping around. So we have active points and total points. So active points describes the one subtool I'm on right here. So we have active points for this female head is close to 13,000. And the eyes are close to 12,000. So what they're doing is taking combination of these guys and giving us that total points. But if I hit Control D, what we've done is subdivided just the head. The eyes are left alone. They could be subdivided on their own. This is why we break apart all this stuff inside of it, or one of the reasons we break stuff apart inside of this, is that we can control the amount of smoothing deformations that happen per subtool. And now that I have a smoother area right here, what I could do, you'll see it particularly well when we increase the focal shift, I can get a more distinct and articulated brush stroke across the surface of the mesh. And if I hit Control D again, we get even smoother. It'll get smoother and smoother the more you subdivide it. So you can see it starts getting really smooth. Now, we do need to be careful when we subdivide, because there's going to be a certain limit before the performance of your computer and ZBrush just crashes. So one thing I would recommend doing just for the few projects that we start off with, so that way, you know, we don't have to, we can return to it a little bit later in the semester, but I would keep the active points per subtool at 1,000,000 or less. Just to start off with, we'll get into the hyper details of stuff, but we shouldn't really need it for our first exercise in our project probably. I mean, we'll definitely return to it, but we need to keep this number down because it'll keep you from saving. ZBrush does this thing when it's about to crash where the screen kind of turns milky and it just looks like it's not doing anything. It's just taking a long time for it to process. But you know, if you keep these things down to, you know, a good low number, the lowest you keep it, but highest detail over here, the performance of your machine is going to be fine because this software is made to handle a very dense mesh. So let's go ahead and subdivide a couple times here so we got a nice base to this. One of the things we'll work through in the semester is working with something called alphas. Alphas are ways you can modify the tip of a brush. So let's take a look at, we'll increase the focal, we'll decrease the focal shift, and we'll just make a good mark right here. We see the circle right here, and it made it to that full radius of that circle. So what I'm going to do is go to my alpha, and I'm going to choose something here like the star. And now when I click and drag, we should get star shape. So we need to create alphas to be able to texture certain things of our objects. Otherwise you'd spend forever just kind of going into micro detail and never be able to get the mesh to truly perform the way you want to. It gets very, very messy and hairy. So next thing we'll cover is basic rendering. Okay, let's say that we were working with this mesh and we did a lot of deformation to the character. We're happy, we want to do maybe a render, get some feedback. Couple things you will need to know. Number one, what we're looking at right now is a canvas window that has not been rendered. It looks cool for a ZBrush. I mean, ZBrush does a great job with their viewport and getting things to look right inside the scene, but it's not rendered. Okay, so to render this out, you click on the BPR button right here, and when I click on it, you'll see that the grid below it disappears. Some of the details get a little bit softened up, and we have shadows that are more distinguished inside of our scene. Rather than just kind of being like an ambient shadow around the scene, we have shadows that are laying down. You'll also be doing quite a bit of saving of your renders in this. You know, we'll be making model sheets of a lot of the work that we're creating in this and rendering it inside of ZBrush. So what we'll need to do is save something like this as an image. So I wanted to wrap this video up on just working with the saving stuff. Because the goal of the video, and at least particularly today, is for you guys to watch the video that goes along with the Canvas syllabi that we have for the class, and just watch this video, maybe download the software, get ready for it. So, but let's talk about just saving things out real quick. Let's go to File, and we'll go to Save As. Now, this is a project, meaning that I'm saving my ZBrush project with all of these details right here. So we have these guys right here and these guys right here. And I can save this to any location I want to. So when we start working in the exercise, I'll show you guys how the structure I would like you guys to build for your exercises. So I won't need to review this guy right here. But next thing you could do, if you close out your project and you open up again, you can find that project folder and save it there. If I just want to save the tool, which will probably be the first method of us working through the exercise, you'll just go to Save As. Or, yeah, Save As. And Save As will save your tool. So you'll see there's a tool acronym down here that this would be saved as, and then you can just open this guy up and continue working on it. So there's the two different file types that we're working with for as far along the lines of being able to activate the mesh and be able to move it around and do things like that, or will be the projects and tools. But if you need to save out images, it's under Document. So I'll go ahead and click the render button real quick again so we have a nice render. I'm going to go to Document and Export. So the document area, you can see I can save this out as a JPEG and a few other different options here, JPEG, BMP, PNG, and TIFF. We can save out this image. And I'll go ahead and act like I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to have this random head. I'm just going to click on Save. And then you would see another window pop open in front of this that would describe how we generate the image. So let's go again, File, Export, and then we'll choose JPEG right here, Save. And then you see this little window. Must have not popped up because I chose Photoshop. That's fine. So in here, what you can see is this is just the rendered image. I could start working with cropping out areas if I want to. I can make some adjustments to the render. You know, if I click on Adjust, I can start playing around with the contrast of this and adjusting it before I hit the OK button, and then I execute creating that image file. The reason I show you this stuff is that, you know, with ZBrush it demands that you know the difference between putting these locations and where you set them up, because I've had students in the past think they're saving their work by going to File, Save, and they save their document, and the next thing they know, when they're opening things up inside of the software, they can't do anything because what you've done is opened up an image. So you'd have this image right here and you'd have other 3D models around. You'll never be able to edit it. Oh, I guess I could add one last thing into the video and then we'll wrap things up. The method for starting out with the basic shape, which we'll return to this would be kind of the last thing I show you guys before we do kind of a similar thing in the next video to kind of start up our mesh. If I was to choose something like a sphere, like this guy right here, when you bring it in, a couple things could happen. So what we'll do, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and I'm going to start ZBrush up fresh, so that way it'll look exactly the way your ZBrush should look when you open it up, and I'll describe what's happening when you first start opening up a sphere. All right, so right now what I'm going to do is I've opened up a fresh version of ZBrush. I'm going to go ahead and, you know, click out of my Lightbox. So this would be what you typically will see when you start up, and if you want to start sculpting, just to play around with like a sphere or something like that, what you could do is click on the Simple Brush area and choose Sphere. Now, it's not going to pop up in your window. The reason for that is this is an empty canvas area, so if I click and drag, we'll start creating a sphere, and it looks like it's active, but if I start clicking and drag again, we'll start getting more and more and more and more spheres. I'm going to hit Control-N to clear my canvas, and we're going to draw the sphere out again like this, but this time what we're going to do is click on the Edit button. And now, a couple of things we should take into consideration here. The sphere is not a sculptable mesh yet. It is basically your primitive shape to say, hey, I want to load up this primitive shape of a sphere and then convert it into a sculptable mesh. This process is similar to what they do in 3D Studio Max. I don't think they don't have anything really like this inside of Maya, unless you really consider something like the convert geometry options inside of it. But basically, what we have here is just the option. It gives us the option to be able to change what the sphere is. I can start changing its divisions inside this area, because this is just a basic geometry thing that they're doing. So if I want to start sculpting onto this, after I have it in edit mode, I have to click on Make Polymesh 3D, and then you could go in and work with it. Okay, so that will wrap up today's kind of micro lecture for the software. By Wednesday, you should have the software downloaded, ready to go. You can email me if you have any issues working with the software, getting it installed. Just let me know what's going on when you're going to download it. I can't guarantee that I can solve your issue for you, because if it's software related stuff, you know, it's sometimes something that it might be with your computer itself. But I imagine that, you know, I've run the software on really old machines, and it seems to do just fine. So other than that, guys, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.